we specialize in food, wine, and tourism architecture, which is basically the hospitality and retail side of vineyards and farm shops, as well as doing high-end residential work. I'm going to talk to you today about Forage Farm Shop and Kitchen, which we used PassivHaus design principles. We borrowed from them rather than actually doing a PassivHaus design. So briefly, PassivHaus is using the orientation, so looking at using solar gain into the building through self-facing windows. That focuses on building envelopes with high levels of insulation and airtightness to create low energy use buildings. Very brief overview. This is a rural diversification project. Rural diversification is non-traditional farming practices. That might be things like converting a field into glamping, or they might have cabins on site that are used for seasonal workers, and then off-season the public stay there, and things like farm shops. Farm actually was doing 3 different projects at the same time. They were creating a free-range chicken shed and field, and doing a truffle plantation all next to the farm shop at the same time. So the site analysis is like the first step in the project. With this one, the town planning was quite tricky because we were running alongside 2 other projects, and the planners were taking that into account as well. It was the chicken shed, and they were creating a new access to the farm. The site is in the Welsh equivalent of an area of outstanding natural beauty, and this, alongside it being a new build rather than reusing existing buildings, made the town plan quite tricky, but it was useful in convincing the clients to build in timber rather than steel and metal. So the site is actually an old wheat field, and when the sun comes out, that hillside in the distance actually just glows. It's really quite pretty. So the site analysis we carried out, we looked at where the views were, where the prevailing winds were, where the sun path worked around potentially where the building was, the rough size of the building area that we needed, and the services area. So from that, it sort of worked up into the concept design level. We oriented, so the truffle field sort of nestles up against the building, and we were able to set the truffle field out, because it is planted in rows, but to curve it round so that if you're actually sitting in the restaurant looking out, you wouldn't look into the rows of trees, and it sort of felt slightly more organic. This is the outdoor seating area, and that part is the restaurant, and we had it facing out to the views and the sort of sun aspect. The rest of the shop and back of house services are all up to the north and the east side. So we used a timber frame and a glulam structure. We didn't want to use any steel in the project. We've got spans of up to 8 meters with the glulams. And we use off-site timber frame panels with a local fabricator who was also the main contractor. Articulated the structure, so I've used kind of almost like a leaf pattern with the spine, because the structure is actually visible internally as well. So setting that out into a pattern was quite important. So the next step is closing in the building. And I found a product, it's called Bitrock, which is quite amazing. So the traditional way of doing it would be with something like OSB and then a building wrap around it. With Bitrock, it's actually a wood fibre sheathing product, and it has a racking or bracing value, which a lot of the wood fibre products don't. It creates an airtight vapor permeable barrier and also contributes to the insulation value. So it does 3 things in one. The other benefit is speed, but you also have to be incredibly precise to the nearest millimetre when you are setting out if you're doing off-site fabrication. With speed, everything is delivered to site. It goes up, the building is erected a lot faster and closed in, so you can get trades on site a lot earlier, which obviously has commercial value. If you're opening up a shop or restaurant, you can start trading earlier. So part of this fabric first approach was sort of borrowing from PassivHaus, is using higher insulation values than what you'd be required for just building control. With timber walls, you can achieve quite high insulation values with much thinner walls. If this was in something like traditional masonry, we'd probably be looking at walls about 350 millimeters thick, whereas these walls were less than 200 millimeters. So externally, the building is clad in Siberian larch. We're just leaving that to grey off naturally. I'm not sure how long that's going to take because I haven't been up for a while, so it may have started doing that already. But internally I wanted to match that greyness, and it was quite difficult finding a water-based stain because you need something that's water-based to go underneath the clear fire retardant coating, so it's all class 0 inside. So natural light and ventilation, we used a lot of sun tunnels and fixed and opening roof lights. The sun tunnels were into the toilet areas on the left-hand side, and these were completely internal. When the project's actually finished, you walk in there and it's just like bright daylight in there. I always sort of slightly poo-pooed them because I thought they were quite ugly, but actually they work amazingly well. We also use them in the kitchen and the back of house areas. Yeah. So the different types of glazing that we used on the entry, we used a polycarbonate. We could get it down to quite a low pitch. It has an insulation value, and it's significantly cheaper than using glass. The central large skylight we kept in glass, but then the Veluxes to the right-hand side, we oriented them to face to the north. We didn't want any sunlight coming down into the shop areas because it could spoil produce. The other Velux on the other side is into the cafe area, so we actually wanted to get the sun into there. So with the use of, bifolds and lots of wall glazing and the roof lights, it's created a very, very light internal spaces. This is in the entry. We had the farm shop off to the right and the cafe to the left. I mean, you wouldn't actually need to have the lights on in there during the day. It's bright enough. So we used screening. The picture on the right-hand side is the glazing that goes into the shop. So it's east-facing, and it was getting the morning sun, so we actually needed to diffuse the light that was coming in. So the screens are actually both aesthetic and practical. The contractor did an amazing job. He made them all on site from treated softwood, and we used local chestnut coppicing. The building concept was actually based on hedgerows. That is the whole form of the building, that linearity, because it was designed to be expanded. So it's almost like 2 modules, and if they ever want to expand, they could just add on a 3rd module without it looking like an addition. The screens were based on sort of the idea of springtime hedgerows, where you get that dappled light that comes through the hedges, and then also the laying patterns and traditional hedge making. So the terrace windows, the little high windows, and the Veluxes, all the opening windows are connected to a CO2 monitor, and it'll automatically open when the CO2 levels rise. And that's that sort of stuffy feeling that you would get, say if you're in a crowded pub in winter. And this alleviates it by letting the fresh air in at a high level without actually altering the heat temperatures. They're also connected to heat sensor monitors for summer, so they'll just automatically open, but the staff have a manual override switch. The terrace is on the sunny side of the building, but it was also where the prevailing winds were coming from. So we've filled in the slots with glass panels, put a transparent roof over it because it does rain a lot in Wales. And all of that still allows all the natural light, as well as creating a protected outside area, but the natural light to go back into the restaurant. The building was due to open in spring of 2020 when COVID hit, which it was just heartbreaking for the clients after spending so much time and energy. They'd recruited all their staff. It did eventually open in June, and then in January this year the building was awarded a local building award, which was very nice. That is basically the end of my presentation, but I thought you would like to see some chickens. They were amazing. It was the most ridiculous experience. I went into the chicken farm. I literally had 1,000 chickens following me. But that's right next door. So the chickens are allowed to wander up into the truffle field. So if you've ever wondered what a truffle field looks like, that's it. It's a mixture of oak and hazelnut trees that take about 5 years to grow before they start producing truffles. So it looks kind of like a vineyard, which is really nice. You've got all these different things to look at when you're actually in the farm shop. So that's it.